Start with no.
Yeah. So welcome to this half-day seminar on flexibility in local electricity grids. We will look at some of the challenges and needs and the regulatory framework in the first half of the seminar, and then some solutions, pilots and best practice in the second half of the seminar. In between, from 1:45 to 2:15, there will be a half-hour break. So then I just give the floor to Ignacio Herrera Anchustegui. Sorry about the pronunciation.
That's very good. That's better than 90%.
Can you just share your screen and start your presentation?
Yes, I will do that. Just give me a second. Yes. Okay, so I hope everybody can see my screen and they can now see it on presentation mode. Is that correct, Andre?
Yes.
Yes, good. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ignacio Herrera Anchustegui. Unpronounceable name, that's absolutely fine. I am an associate professor at the law faculty of the University of Bergen. I am focused my research on electricity regulation on EU and EEA energy law in general. And today I have the pleasure to share with you some of the thoughts on what's new when it comes to local electricity grids in the EU clean energy package. I'm just going to tell you, like most lawyers, I'll just do a very brief overview on the top of the surface, because this becomes rather quite challenging and complicated from a legal perspective. But most of you are not interested in that. Most of you are interested in more fun and exciting things that are happening. And it's my job in a way to tell you, yes, you can do it, or no, you cannot do it. But I will try to be more positive and show that there's actually quite a lot happening when it comes to the regulatory push. So what I'm going to talk about is a little bit of the clean energy package in a nutshell. Then I'll speak about the push that gets prosumers, or known in Norwegian as pluskunder, in the clean energy package. Talk very briefly about aggregation and citizen energy communities, and closing with electromobility in the electricity network, and some questions that I have maybe for BKK or BKK later on, and some final concluding thoughts. So let me begin then with the clean energy package. So some of you, or most of you, are familiar with it, but the clean energy package is a set of regulatory instruments, so that's directives and regulations that come from the European Union that have changed the landscape of EU energy law, in particularly electricity. And it is the outcome of 10 years of regulation in the third energy package. And here I want to make a disclaimer. In Norway, we're not members of the EU for the good and the bad things of it. And because of that, and because of political resistance in the past, we're only part or integrated into the third energy package, which is the rules that govern gas and electricity from 2009. The clean energy package we have not implemented in Norway, but it's 10 years ahead. And it's because, as I said before, it answers to these challenges of more electricity in the future. We want to make sure that it's greener, and this is very much connected to the idea of the Green Deal in Europe. We want to promote investment. Before COVID, we were talking about this. After COVID, much more now. We want to make sure that we address the problem of stability in the system, particularly for TSOs, but also for DSOs, and how we deal with variable supply from renewable energy and interconnection. So the energy package, the clean energy package, comes therefore as an answer to this and brings about 7 new instruments that are enacted in EU law. So that means that they regulate the rules on how European electricity markets work, and they were released in 2018 and 2019. Gas is left untouched by the clean energy package. There is a minor change in the gas directive. That's about problems with Russia and gas and Gazprom. It's about import pipelines. I've written about it, but I'm not going to talk about it today. So as I mentioned before, there are 7 new regulations and directives, and they include renewables, electricity, modification of the rules on Acer, and it is a major overhaul of what we have. As I mentioned already, they are the foundation of EU energy law, but they do not apply yet in a way in the EEA area and Norway. However, Norwegian companies compete in the European markets, And these rules are a modernization of the rules that we had before. And we will see that a lot of the things that I'm speaking about here are happening in Norway. So the fact that we're not part of the clean energy package does not mean that this is not a reality out there. One of the aspects of the clean energy package is that there's a push for prosumers or pluskunder. And this is something that the European Commission has tried to do very much. We want to ensure that there's possibilities for consumers to participate in markets, not be purely passive and only acquire goods or services, in particular electricity, but we want consumers to be engaged and be active. And because of this, some of the changes that have taken place in the clean energy package put them at the core of this, the idea of the pluskunder, of the prosumer, which is this idea of you are a consumer, but you also sell and you do different activities. So we don't want them anymore to be purely passive. And what we want to do is that we make sure that there's enough room in the framework to be market participants. So you're able to buy, sell, and store energy. Because of this, they achieve new rights. One very simple that we see every day in our house is the possibility of having smart meters. And it's no longer a possibility, it's actually an obligation. You need to have a smart meter. If your country is part of the European Union, you need to have one. In Norway, most people have a smart meter. I think everybody has a smart meter now already. On top of that, we want to make them empowered so that consumers can be part of electricity markets, but they can organize themselves too. An example of that is an energy community, and I will talk a little bit more in detail about this. But it is not only about benefits, but it's also about making consumers aware of the fact that they are a member of the market. And because of that, there is a push to change the way that tariffs are made. And there is an idea that we should move to flexible tariffs, the variable tariffs that make consumers of electricity and end consumers of electricity cost reflexive. This push is integrated into the law, and the main article that regulates this is Article 15 of the Electricity Directive. So the Electricity Directive is the instrument that sets the basic rules of the game on how electricity services and production of energy is going to be carried out. And it tells us that there's this idea of a prosumer, and it is very clear, have the right to be active. And that activity in the market as a buyer, but also as a seller or as someone that stores energy, has to be not being subject to disproportionate or discriminatory requirements from an administrative perspective. So I don't need to fill a huge amount of paperwork to put a rooftop solar panel in the top of my house, but also fees. It also is very clear that they have the right to do different things. So they have the right of aggregating their activity. So that means that more than one consumer and consumer will get together and they will coordinate how they behave. I'll speak about that later. They have the right to self-generate electricity. That's why it's possible to have rooftop solar panels and to also sell them into the market too. And you can also, as an end consumer, enter into a power purchase agreement. I think it's probably a bit difficult, but yeah, it's a possibility there in the long term. You are allowed to participate in flexibility schemes and energy efficiency schemes as an active consumer. However, you also have the right to delegate to a third party the management of the installations that I have, because I'm not an expert on electricity networks. I will ask someone else to do it for me. And yes, they have a lot of rights, but they also have the duty to make sure that they are subject to cost-reflective network charges. And here I want to bring up to the fora the discussion that we have had recently on the structure of netleie, or how you pay for your grid, and whether this is actually making consumers to be cost-reflective or not. Is something that is still on the table, I suspect. There's also the possibility for storing. So end consumers, and some of you already have a battery in your house that you use to power up your car, but you also use it to sell electricity. And because of this, you have the right to have storage, and you have the right to have a grid connection that is given by you, by the DCO, to power your storage. But it's going to be subject to duties of balancing and responsibility, because as I have here at the top, there's a general duty that end consumers and prosumers will be responsible for imbalances that they generate into the market. When it comes to storage, there's not going to be also any requirements for licenses or extraordinary fees. So in the sense that they are being able to do activity in a relatively easy way. In addition to this rights that you have as a consumer of electricity, when you're a prosumer and you have your battery, there's a possibility of organizing in groups, and that will be through two modalities. I'm going to speak about both of them. One of them will be the aggregation. And aggregation is actually an activity that is conducted by someone that is defined as an aggregator. And the aggregator, what they do is that they pool the activity and flexibility of electricity users and makes it available into the market. So it is someone that will coordinate my demand response, for example, or my customer load, and they will put that flexibility into the market. It could be the short-term market, it could be the long-term market, it could be the intraday market, it could be the day-ahead market, and they will try to sell that flexibility. Or they will try to be also organizing to sell power that is generated by one or more of those people. Customers and pluskunder are authorized and allowed by the regulation to use aggregation and benefit from it. And on top of that, it's also interesting that is the possibility to benefit from aggregation from a different country. So people living in the east of Norway could use aggregators that are located, for example, in Sweden or in Denmark, to give you some possibility of this. Aggregators are also understood that they're going to be player participants in markets, and they have to be on equal footing with other providers of electricity. So they cannot be discriminated. And there are two types of aggregators, basically. The ones that are dependent from an electricity company. So my supplier of electricity will be at the same time my aggregator that coordinates my flexibility and that of my neighbor. But it could be independent. So a completely independent party that offers as their business model the possibility of aggregation. So this is regulated in something that is called the aggregation contract. And the aggregation contract, according to the law, the countries have to ensure that you as a consumer are allowed to buy independently aggregator for whoever you want. So you're free to purchase services of aggregation. And I don't have to purchase services from aggregation from my supplier of electricity. I can buy it from whoever I want. So this is a very important thing. Also, I can enter into an aggregation contract without having to have the consent of my supplier of electricity. And the consumers are entitled to receive all the data that is related to their aggregation free of charge. And aggregation, therefore, it brings the possibility to coordinate flexibility among different electricity users. But this push for pluskunder is also even more move forward in the clean energy package with the creation of citizen energy communities. And a citizen energy community, it's about putting together citizens and small businesses that they will try to coordinate their activity to. Different from an aggregator because they do more things than an aggregator, but not necessarily too different, conceptually speaking, from an aggregator. But it's a completely new concept, and it's a concept that is based on open and voluntary participation of certain types of individuals. So you will have natural person or municipalities or small enterprises. So big players are not entitled to enter into a citizen energy community. And this citizens energy community are about delivering benefits to the people that are part of it, but also to the society as a whole in terms of environmental, economic, or social benefits. They are not about profit making. So a citizen energy community for the European regulator, it's not about making money, it's about facilitating possibilities of doing things in a better way. Unlike an aggregator, they can do more things. They can generate, sell supply, they can aggregate consumption, they can do storage, they can enter into energy efficient services, and even they can offer charging services for electricity vehicles. What's important in this concept, again, and I would like to reiterate it, is that it's for natural persons like you and me, or a municipality or small enterprises. And what we want to do is that we want to allow the people to have the chance to get together. What are countries required to do according to the existing legal framework? Well, they have to make sure that energy communities are a possibility, and you will be surprised some countries did not want to accept this for a lot of red tape issues, but now they have to do it. And on top of that, they have to make sure that participation is open and voluntary. And that also means the negative, that I, as a person, can leave my citizen energy community without having to have a particularity that I'll be hooked to it forever. Importantly, the fact that I am a member of a citizen energy community does not mean that I don't have rights, but also obligation as an end consumer of electricity. The citizen energy community can also participate in markets, and because they can, they should not be discriminated, and they are subject to fair, proportionate, and transparent procedures and charges. However, when you have a citizen energy community, they in a way are going to create a distortion on particularly the distribution network and the distribution of electricity, because this is going to be distributed generation. Because of this, they have, according to the regulation, the obligation to contribute in an adequate and balanced way to the overall cost sharing of the system. So I guess in a way, this is trying to address the discussion of what happens when the rich people go off the grid. And that is something that is being discussed mostly in the US, but I think we will start seeing it up when it comes to Norway. Energy communities can also be organized in a cross-border fashion. So someone sitting in Fredrikstad could mix with another energy community in the border of Sweden, for example. Or if you live in Maastricht, which is an even better example, you can have cross-border participation with an energy community that is also in Belgium, in the Netherlands, and in Germany. They, importantly for networks and distribution networks, they can own, they can create, they can purchase, or they can lease a distribution network. So they could actually become competitors of, for example, BKK or NADSO. And they have the right to autonomously manage those distribution networks, which is quite interesting. But at the same time, by owning this, you also have to comply with the requirements to be a DSO, not an easy feat if you're not an expert on what you're doing. On top of that, countries have to ensure, and this is mandatory for countries, that citizen energy communities have the right to access all electricity markets, so short and long term, and intraday and day ahead and balancing markets. They cannot be discriminated, and they have to be taken into account, and they have to receive a payment of fees and requirements that are proportionate. As when it comes to pluskunder, and as it comes to the issue of aggregators, citizen energy communities are to be held financially responsible for imbalances, which is a major issue because the idea is that costs should be allocated to the people that generate them. And when you, as a citizen energy community, consume electricity, you're not treated as a normal business, but you're treated as an active customer, which I spoke about already. Let me just do a couple more and then I'm finished for today. Citizen energy communities, we also know that they have the possibility to own a distribution grid, but they also have the right to manage the distribution grid in the area of operation. And in relation to this, they are allowed to conclude an agreement with the DSO on how they're going to manage that grid. But at the same time, they have to be subject to network charges and they cannot be discrete. And importantly, when you manage the distribution grid, they must not discriminate or harm customers that remain connected to the distribution system. But at the same time, by being off the grid, then you are directly, in my opinion, increasing the cost of the DSO and the distribution network because there's going to be less people that have to pay for that. So how that will be done, I'm not really sure. Just to finish now, integration of electromobility, which is something that is happening in Norway, and we see it quite often. And in this case, we see that the European Union says that countries must facilitate electromobility integration, and because of that, public and private recharging points. So public and private companies have the right to put recharging points for cars on the street. On top of that, DSOs have an obligation to cooperate with this kind of companies that are integrating recharging points. Very interestingly, and when I read this, I thought, oh, but a lot of DSOs are doing this in Norway, and can they do this? The directive says that DSOs cannot own, develop, manage, or operate recharging points for vehicles. So if this is true and the third energy package comes in, what about, for example, BKK recharging points? Can we have this? And if we look at the directive and we only read this, the answer is no, we cannot. And how is the directive addressing this? They recognize that actually this is a problem because DSOs are very well suited for creating charging points for electromobility. So there's an exception, like with most things in law. Yes, anybody has the right to develop their own recharging points, but if no one else except the DSO is able to put a tender outside that is a good enough tender at a reasonable cost, then a DSO can actually own a recharging station. But this must be regulated by the national regulator, which in the Norwegian case would be NVE, and you have to grant that approval. And interestingly, it is clear from the regulation that the DSO is going to have to apply rules on third-party access and not discriminating among other kind of different users. And in the long run, the vision here is that this kind of electromobility points are going to start getting away from DSOs because you need to consult every other year and every period of time about the possibility to reassess what the situation is and see if there's anyone that is interested in entering in electromobility and charging points that is not a DSO. If there is interest for this, then, and I'm quoting from the directive, member states or countries must ensure that DSOs have to be phasing out when it comes to this kind of electromobility activity. So just to conclude, there's a lot going on in the clean energy package when it comes to distribution networks, distributed generation, and the possibility of being an active consumer. I expect that this in Norway is going to happen even if we're not in the clean energy package for now, because in Norway, people are aware more than some other countries do about the possibility of being active consumers. And I don't think there is any really good reason why Norway should not also try to push for pluskunder and activities such as this. And in fact, it does in a way, even if we're not, let's say, in the same page when it comes to regulation. So just a little bit of self-advertisement for those of you that are interested. Some of these aspects that I have discussed today, I've written about it in this Routledge Handbook of Energy Law. I'm one of the main editors there, but I have a chapter that is on prosumers and the clean energy package. I've written about competition when it comes to demand response and aggregation of demand response as well. And you will be able to find some of these papers in the links that I have here. With this, Andre, you're getting a little bit worried because I went 2 minutes over time. I stopped my screen, I stopped sharing, and in 21 minutes instead of 20, I finished what I had to say. Thank you very much for your attention, everybody.
Thank you, Ignacio. That was perfect. 2 minutes is nothing. So there is a question for you from Juan. Why do you think it's difficult nowadays to have peer-to-peer purchase agreements?
That's a very good question, Juan, and I think I recognize the name from a class that I was teaching at NHH, if I'm not mistaken. So very good point. It shows that you have to be careful when you speak, and I speak too fast, so that my possibility of saying stupid stuff, it is increased exponentially. What I mean with a peer-to-peer purchase agreement, and yeah, good to see that is you, Juan, un saludo. It's the fact that it's peer-to-peer purchase agreements is not what I meant. I meant power purchasing agreement, which is a different story. So a PPA will be a long-term, so a power purchase agreement will be a long-term electricity contract that's typically entered into by large buyers of electricity with large suppliers. So when you talk about P2P, I understand as peer-to-peer. If that's what you're telling me, please tell me, yes, that's what I mean. But peer-to-peer, it will be a different story. And that is, yes. So when it comes to the peer-to-peer one, what I would say there is in a peer-to-peer, that's what actually aggregation and community, citizen energy communities are about. So this is about entering into contracts peer-to-peer in a way. And you can call it peer-to-peer or something less sexy, but that's what they're about. I don't think they're complicated anymore. So what I meant is that I think it's complicated for an individual customer to sell into a long-term power purchase agreement. But if you're aggregated, I don't see why not, theoretically speaking, because you will sell your flexibility in a long term. And that is pretty common when it comes to demand response in large markets. So large consumers of electricity will sell their flexibility years in advance. Because of that, they are obliged to comply with some requirements of demand response. So I don't think it clarified the answer, but I tried to. But yet again, peer-to-peer and power purchase agreements are different things. So sorry for the confusion.
I have a question for you myself. You mentioned one of the requirements in the package was that aggregators cannot be discriminated against. Can you mention some examples of how this discrimination could happen, and who would do it, and why they would do it?
Aggregators, in a way, are competing against suppliers of electricity, because an aggregator is able to pull demand response, and then they will be able to sell demand response into the market. To give you an example of what aggregation could do. And because of that, they're simply going to lower the price of electricity, because we know electricity prices become higher the more that is closer to being the limit of the system, because it's a monopsony kind of situation. And in this case, aggregators could, for example, be discriminated by not being allowed to have third-party access into a distribution or transmission network. And in that case, they could be discriminated by having a higher tariff than anybody else. And therefore, you're doing something that in antitrust law will be akin to a margin squeeze. You could have requirements, and this is typically what happens. You have requirements that are designed for DSOs or TSOs to be part or large suppliers of electricity. So of course, technically speaking, they need to comply with a lot of technical standards. And if you apply verbatim, so copy paste those technical standards to an aggregator, you're in fact making them a much more disadvantage, because they will probably not be able to comply with their technical standards. And in a way, you're discriminating against and you're foreclosing them for entering into the market. So that is an example of how I see that aggregation can be a problem. More clearly even is when you have aggregators that are independent and aggregators that are directed from your supplier of electricity. So let me give you an example on this. I have 3 more minutes, so I think I can make it. My mother lives in France. She lives right by the border between France and Spain. She buys electricity from a French company. Why? Because for French systems are awful. You need a French bank account for doing anything. And the way that the French bank account says that you live in France is that you have a electricity bill, which I think it's illegal, because there's a right that I can choose to buy electricity from Spain. But okay, life is complicated. So my French is not very good. I can manage to pay the taxes and I can manage to speak to people and buy things, but I prefer entering into a contract with an electricity provider. I prefer to discuss this in a different language. So I ended up entering into a contract with Électricité de France, which is the supplier of electricity. And they told me, oh, but we have a possibility of regulating your activities when it comes to demand response. They didn't say that, but they said, we can check your thermostat and we can turn off your water tank. And they do that not only to me, but they do it to the whole building, and the way they aggregate. So they are an aggregator that is dependent on my supplier of electricity. If you have, on the other hand, an independent aggregator, there is very clearly reasons in which why, for example, Électricité de France, that on top of it is a vertically integrated utility that also controls transmission and distribution, could discriminate against an independent aggregator. And they would say, no, if you want to get electricity from me, you can only do aggregation with me, because in a way you are not competing with anybody else. So yes, I do think there are possibilities for aggregation discrimination. And I think this is where more, let's say, business expertise is going to let us see examples of it. And then it's going to be people that work in competition or energy law matters that is going to say, look, this is okay or not okay. Yes.
Okay, I don't see any more questions, so I think we'll just thank Ignacio, because now we're 12:45, and then the next speaker is from BKK, Augusta Pitalice. You're going to talk about what kinds of flexibilities a DSO would need. Yeah, floor is yours.
Yes, hello everyone. So I hope you're seeing the right screen now.
We do.
Yeah, it's sometimes very funny because you're going to talk about big, huge digitalization things and suddenly you can't share the right screen or something. But I hope that's not the problem here. Yes, so starting with, I thank Andrea for inviting BKK to present DSO's point of view in terms of flexibility. It's really interesting what Ignacio said, and I want to start answering him that the charging stations are actually not the part of the grid, BKK NAT. But it's a part of BKK Elektrifisering, BKK Elektrifisering. So yes, so I hope that answers you, Ignacio. And yes, I'm Augusta, and I'm working with BKK as a project lead in research and development projects. And we are actually actively involved in projects which address flexibility as an issue in the grid. So yes, today we are going to see about the needs and of course the challenges of the grid operation. So to start with, what we see as an important challenge to address now, as in 2020, is that we see a maximum load is over like 2000 megawatts. And this is an enormous need of electricity, of course. But suddenly in 2030, what we are expecting is the maximum load is suddenly 5000 megawatts. And this is actually like 150% increase. And like 2030, it's actually very close. And for the DSO's point of view, it's like you're going to blink and suddenly you're in 2030. So it's that close. And what we have as an aim in BKK is that we want to deliver the best energy system for our customers, of course. And it should be secured, it should be effective, it should be greener, and it should be smarter in approach. So what we have been doing till now is that we have delivered what the customers wanted. Of course, the customers are the central for us, and always been so and will be so. But the power need is like it is enormous now, and we have been investing in all the traditional infrastructure till now. And it's like we need power in an area. What we are going to do is we are going to build infrastructure, finish it off, fine and clean. But now we are going to think like, is that a smarter and a greener approach, or actually we can do something else? So yes, what we think is like the solution can be like a combination of the traditional infrastructure that's available already, along with the end-use flexibility. So I wanted to show this just to look into like the investments and how much we are investing in the power grid. In 2018, it's like we have invested 2 million kroner, and nearly 65% of it is in the power grid. So this is actually huge for 2018. And if we are going to continue this until 2030, it's going to be enormous. And I liked what Ignacio said also, like it's not about making money, but it's like thinking both the social and the economical causes and reasons here. So, and here you see like what the future grid operation and system operation would look like. It's like utilization, of course, the utilization of the capacity of the available infrastructure. It's sharing what we have already, and it's working together for the betterment of the society, for the people, and of course, the most important, climate too. And we are going to interact across borders. It's coordination across borders, meaning like between areas, and of course, between the DSOs, between DSO and TSOs, and at the national level. So this is what our picture of future grid operation looks like. And this is going to require a lot of things like the customers, active customers, participating customers, the frameworks and regulations, and of course the markets where we can like sell and we can get electricity, and the people working with it. Of course, the new digital technology, all the artificial intelligence, the big data, the machine learning and everything, all the new phrases and things, and the existing infrastructure itself. It's very important. We have to preserve it, and we are going to work with it. And not but the least, sustainability. It's getting more important now. And the picture, what we have in mind for us, BKK, it's something like this. Going to be, we are going to, of course, produce power, and the solar panels, and this I'm not going to discuss about more, and the microgrids, where people can charge and can produce power, and important customers, industrial and commercial customers who can actively participate in flexibility. And of course, all the electric transportation, the ferries and the trains, the buses and electric cars. And BKK is going to be a central point here, where we are going to, of course, we are going to deliver what the customers require in a secure, effective, smarter and greener way. So the future grid operation is, among other things, it's going to be a myriad of data that's being exchanged, lot of data, and various systems that can communicate with each other. We can see that a little bit later, and collaboration and automatic exchange of data. And this is going to take place in real time, very instantly, fast communication. So this is what the future grid is going to look like. And I can start with giving a definition of flexibility. So I'm not sure like everybody understands flexibility here, but flexibility as defined, it's the modification of generation, injection, production, and or consumption patterns on an individual or an aggregate level, of course. And this is going to be with the external signal in order to provide a service within the energy system and to maintain stable grid operation. So this is what we think as a resource point of view as a flexibility. And the types of flexibility, how can we start to utilize it? It can be either by targeting target and energy saving, where the consumers themselves have energy saving methods and they save energy the whole day, a little bit of energy, I mean, and reduction of power peaks, where we are going to cut all these power peaks by not consuming energy during that time. Not everyone, of course, but few people. And relocation of consumption, where we are thinking like, okay, the consumption during the consumption period, people can relocate their loads to some other time of the day. So these are types of flexibility. And what are the actual needs and motivation here? So of course we need motivation to keep us going, right? And the needs too. So the most important thing is electrification of transport. Huge need for power and electricity here. And distributed energy resources. Day by day, we are getting more distributed production and more distributed storage resources. And decarbonization, very important for the future. And of course, we have new technologies which helps us, which gives us opportunities to actually analyze and see how this is going to be. And so the solution, flexibility can be a cost-effective alternative, and or it can be supplement to the traditional grid investments. So looking at the challenges, before going into the needs, we need to address the challenges. And firstly, what we are going to talk about is that the actual available flexibility is situation-based. So it's going to be varying. It's going to vary with prices, it's going to vary with temperature, it's going to vary with load conditions, access to substitutes. So it's not a term with that we can believe, and that it's very unpredictable. And this end-use flexibility can therefore not appear as an available, it's not stable, it's not quantifiable resource without this being put into a specific supply situation. So what we have to do is we have to quantify these flexible resources in terms of time, volume, and location. So when we are going to take the time, it's like the period when it is available. We want to know when it can be available, the response time, like how quick you can get this flexible resource, and the frequency, like how often you can get it. So also we have to think about the volume, like how much power is available, and can it be disconnected completely, or can it be like 50% connected or disconnected, and the duration, like how long is this available. Of course, the location is very important. Where is it available? Is it going to be useful? And the most important thing also, the costs available. Is this going to be a solution for the traditional infrastructure, or it's going to be even more costly for us? So what we are doing in BKK is we have started a project called Energy Management, where we are going to take a look overview of the distributed resources. We are going to take a look at the electric cars, the charging stations, the production resources, distributed production resources, the distributed storage resources, the commercial and the industrial customers, the household customers, and even microgrids. We are going to think about, like, can this be also possible, in what way, and how the regulations challenges us. So of course, first the grid operation and now grid planning. So are the flexibility measures, is it a cost-effective alternative to the traditional grid investments? If so, like, is it stable, is it secure, and is it of course profitable in a way where it's going to, we are thinking about the social and economical costs. And for this, we have to like know the production and the consumer plans too, and we have to incorporate them in the tools, supporting tools. So this is the need for new tools and methods and algorithms in planning and decision support tools to take flexible resources into account. As of now, we are not having this one. Of course, we look at the opportunities where we can use these flexible resources, but we don't have any good tools like where we can like immediately know what's the result. So that's about grid planning and grid operation. So while we are operating a grid, the system should be stable, and to fulfill the voltage quality requirements, we have to fulfill them while handling a rapidly changing supply and demand situation. So when we are going to have a lot of distributed production resources, we are going to have a lot of voltage problems, and this should be like, we have to look into this too. So while operating closer to the limits, the observability and the controllability issues come. The requirements are it's a lot more than what we are already doing now. And the corrective actions must be available, and it must be properly implemented too. So what we are doing is like, there's a need for prediction tools. And in BKK, we have a project going on. It's called CogniGrid. It's the digital twin, where we can already predict some of the situations. So this is actually one of the situations where we could predict, where we could stimulate electric car situations. So what we did was we had a stimulation of a transformer, 500 kV transformer, and we stimulated it like it could just handle 90 customers without electric car charging. And we said like, okay, 50% of the customers in that substation are having electric cars, and they have an average charging pattern. So what did this look like? Suddenly the substation was overloaded, like it will be overloaded. That's what it's a simulation result. So it was overloaded almost every week, several times in a week. And it was also, we had a congestion period of 42 hours. The top load was like 42 hours. So this was the situation, and this is like the prediction tools are very important to us. So while thinking about the planning and the operation, we need, of course, competence. People working with this, what they are going to do. They need to have a lot of data management skills, a lot of ICT skills, analysis skills. And we have been hiring a lot of data management people, data analysts, and many other people for the ICT department. And of course, the prosumers and the customers and the markets, we need to have more knowledge about these things. And most importantly, risk management, how we are going to manage the risk, what are the risks actually, and how we are going to manage them. And the technicians in the field too, they require a lot of competence. It's not the same as we have been doing all these years. So we need competence, something like shifting towards digitalization. So in BKK, we are already we have assessment of competence and the building and knowledge sharing going on year by year. So we are getting through it. And then what the most important thing is system-oriented needs. What are the needs for the systems? Like we have already a distribution management system, we have the SCADA, but what other needs are we needing now? It's like the interconnection between various customer data and the customer systems along with data security. It's the most important issue. And we also need many APIs where we can send activation signal and the provider can send us back measurement data. So this becomes very necessary for the efficient operation of the grid in future, where if we are going to use flexibility as an option, of course. And we also need to get an overview of the distributed resources in the grid, because we know like where we have all these production and the charging stations or whatever, but we don't have a good overview. And the next, of course, our hero of our story, the flexible customer. So how important is this? It's the biggest challenge which we are facing, the transformation from passive consumers to active flexibility providers. This can be like, we can go through this with the help of communication tools for information sharing to build knowledge. Of course, the consumer must know like what he's going to get and what he's going to do and various other things. New economic reforms to give consumers incentives. This is going to be the work of the regulation units. It's very important to use flexibility. If we are going to use flexibility as an option, then the regulations should help DSOs too. And most importantly, remotely controlling and automation without the active involvement of the consumers. So this is actually like most of the consumers are need like remotely controlled and automation techniques instead of the consumer himself or herself controlling the flexibility needs of the company. So this is one of the biggest challenges which we are facing, even in the pilot projects where we need many consumers to be actively participating. Yes, and the grid challenges and flexibility options. The challenges, it can be like something like the capacity challenges, where the consumption increases gradually. And this can be like, the solution can be load relocation, of course. We are going to have voltage issues, which we saw earlier, like a weak grid in case of sudden increase in load, then we are going to have a lot of voltage issues. Distributed projection, it's again the voltage issue. And this can be done like disconnection of certain loads or batteries, or maybe by voltage boosters. And again, unforeseen failure or overload, it's going to be a big challenge also. But here we can use agreements and arrangements where we can purchase flexibility as an option. And it can be like the challenge can be also in planned disconnection. If we are going to have the planned disconnections are actually planned months or weeks ahead. And we can also have the purchase of flexibility to handle these planned disconnections. It's actually a very good solution for the flexibility in future for us. So here we see what we are doing now. It's like the planning. We have to think about the planning. We have to think about the grid operation, and then we have to think about the flexibility need. Of course, the assessment of the flexibility need. We have to quantify the resources and ordering the flexibility demand. Where is it available? How long is it available? How much is it available? And delivering the flexibility, who is going to deliver this for us? Is it the storage, is it the charging, production, or the aggregators? And of course, the market mechanisms, the regulations, the tariffs, the bilateral agreements, is it going to help us? And we have to activate and verify it, and then come back again to the planning part of the grid. So I wanted to end with this note saying that BKK is a driving force for the green infrastructure and energy system of the future. So yes, any questions?
Thanks for the very good presentation. There is a question from Juan for you. He wonders if you, maybe Juan, could you ask your question yourself? Well, seems like he doesn't want to do that. But the question is, I think he means, is it? Do you have information about your pilot projects? For example, can we have access to more detailed information about your project on energy management for flexibility challenges?
Yes, actually,
maybe you could say a bit about that.
Yeah, actually, we have a web page, and I think we are going to launch it soon for all the research and development projects. And one of the projects is, of course, energy management, and there are many other projects too, which concerns flexibility as an issue. And this is going to be available for all of us. We can just go there in and check all the results and what questions we have and everything. Yeah. So
okay.
I hope that was
maybe you could share it. And there is a question from Jörgen. Energy market regulators keep asking, how much flexibility do the DSO needs? How would you reply?
It's a very difficult question to answer. It's not quantifiable. So, we have to predict, and we have to use all these tools like digital twin, digital twin, and we have to. It's not a one-word answer to just answer the question. So it's a difficult question. But of course, we are getting there. We are getting to quantify all these resources, and we are going to see like what's the need and how we are going to handle it too.
I have a question myself. I think you mentioned your customers as the ultimate hero. But I think also you mentioned other sources of flexibility like aggregators or participating in markets. What do you view as the most important way to provide flexibility as a DSO?
Yes, actually, like of course, we are believing the customers. It's the most important way, like how we can get flexibility, because it's going to be local, all right? Like we need the local needs to be addressed, and this can be done, of course, by the consumers themselves. And but we are looking at the opportunities that nodes, for example, like it's a market. I think there's a speech afterwards about it, and I think we are thinking to look those options too, the markets and the other agreement part of thing also. So we are looking at all the options available for us.
Maybe a small follow-up question also. Well, BKKnet is a heavily regulated company, so your income is almost entirely determined by the regulator. How would you say that affects the attractiveness of your options? For example, comparing buying flexibility from your own customers versus buying it from an aggregator?
Actually, the regulators too understand the need for flexibility. So they are at it, like they are giving us opportunities too. It's not like fully closed. So both the markets and are regulated too, and even the microgrids and the opportunities of charging stations or whatever. It's like the regulators are looking up to this too, and I think we are going to challenge the regulators too because we need to use flexibility as an option for this huge electrification thing coming in the future. So both the regulators and the DSOs, they understand the needs.
But it can be challenging in this. The regulation itself can be perhaps a challenge.
Yes, to understand and to like question and to challenge. It's a very huge thing.
Yeah, I don't see any more questions now.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned some good career options, all the analysts you need. So I guess we have some students in the audience that will find that interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's good advertising.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then I think I'll just say thank you to Augusta, and then I think we just move on to Anna Sofie Risnes from Statnett, who will talk about local and national flexibility needs and the need for coordination. The floor is yours, Anna Sofie.
Let's see. Okay, let's try to make this a slideshow. Let's see if it's working together. We're not used to you. We usually use Teams, so I'm not familiar. Are you seeing the slide presentation, or are you just seeing the slides now?
I see the slides, so you should enter full screen.
Yeah, that's what I'm struggling with.
I think that's.
Is this better?
This is better.
Excellent. So thank you for inviting me, and thanks for 2 very good presentations before me. It's always good to have something to return to when I come to my presentation, because local and national flexibility, what is needed, how to value it, and how to coordinate markets and system operators. And let me just start with saying that I don't have the answer to all these questions, but basically they are core questions to understanding how to move forward in this energy transition. My name is Anna Sofie Risnes. I work at Statnett. Statnett is the Norwegian TSO, and we're responsible for the transmission grid. So we're like a grid company for the transmission grid, covering the higher voltage levels and the entire nation. And we're also responsible for the interconnectors to Sweden, Finland, Russia, Denmark, Netherlands, and soon UK. But basically, we're also system operators. And the part being system operator is about dealing with flexibility. So basically, where the DSOs are now trying to find their role and how to move into new types of operation using new tools and flexibility, we're also struggling to find out how to do this even more advanced, but we're basically worked with flexibility for a long time. And I think it's very good. The previous presentation had a slide saying, what is flexibility? Because when we talk about flexibility, we sometimes, we might be thinking about different things. So one thing is that flexibility is the ability to change. But when you talk about flexibility, I also think that it's important to see what market you're thinking about. So I will be using some of my presentation to just have some of that context for further discussion. Because the same way as the system operators at the distribution level is seeing the need for flexibility rising, this is happening over the entire system. It's basically the same drivers that we see and that is challenging our system. It's more renewables, more interconnectors, active consumers, European legislation, obviously. You saw that earlier today. There's a lot of new regulation that would challenge the way that we operate and the roles that we currently have in our markets, and the new technology that provides new opportunities. So what is then important is when we talk about this flexibility, because from a market perspective, it's basically always been the production that needs to follow the consumption. But what we see now from the countries that have already entered a lot of renewables into their system, like wind and solar, that's not able to regulate, is that the consumption needs to be able to follow the production. And as we see electrification of more and more consumption in Norway as well, this will also be a challenge for us. So in order to get this to work, we need to facilitate the market access and work with both new and existing market players. And of course, improve our markets and systems together with the other system operators, both in Europe and nationally the DSOs. So I said, what kind of flexibility, what markets are we discussing? And sometimes if we're for consumers, they would think about their supply contract and they would think about the tariffs. But being at NHS, I guess you might be familiar with the wholesale markets. But when we talk about the flexibility, it's also important to think about the necessity and importance of flexibility in these energy markets, because it's basically in the energy markets where the big values also lie, and the energy markets are vital for our security of supply. And for example, Tibber has been mentioned earlier, and what is interesting with Tibber is that they're showing how consumers can change their battery charging according to the prices set in the energy markets. Because in Norway, we're in a very special situation because so many Norwegians have a supply contract which have a relation to the wholesale prices. So basically, we have also an opportunity to value the flexibility of consumers more in the energy markets. And one of the reasons I want to show this is a very important context, the energy markets, which since you also have an intraday option, goes pretty close to the operating hour, is a big opportunity for consumers. And sometimes when we talk about flexibility, it ends up being a discussion about how system operators can use it for their more short-term purposes. But I started saying that as system operator, flexibility is our core business, and basically it is, because what is planned is one thing, but a plan is only a plan, and in reality, consumption and production needs to be perfectly matched. And this frequency, which ensures is a signal on whether or not this is perfectly balanced, is dealt with through markets already. So what is done is that the spot market, energy market, ensures that you have a balance in the planning phase, but this will never be the exact same in the operating hour. So this is what we do when we're using balancing market, is that we have then introduced markets so that the production and also consumption already today can participate in finding the real-time balance. And in the Nordics, we were pretty early in finding a market solution for valuing this flexibility in the operating hour, and we were able to establish a Nordic balancing markets. And it's really simple common merit order, where we get the bids into our market, and then we activate the bids that we need in order to ensure the balance. Then we activate the bids according to price order. And what is also interesting about and the way we use this balancing market in Norway is that we also use it to deal with congestions that arise within the bidding zones. I'm not going to go into the entire market design. I think Jørgen, which is speaking later today, would be better suited for that. But I think it's a good way to start, because it also is important context on the value and how and why we need to cooperate in how to value and how to use this flexibility moving forward, so that we're able to find like an optimal solution, and we're able to actually use the market participants' consideration of what would it cost them, what are their marginal price for changing their input or output at that certain hour. And the balancing market is also important for something else, and that it set the price for everybody that participates in the market. They're in balance, because today, if you miss on your obligation in the energy market, you're penalized through an imbalanced price. And why are we doing this? It's because, and why are we able to do this? It's because we're already highly decentralized and renewable. 40% of the installed capacity of production in Norway is connected to the regional distribution grid. So sometimes when you discuss with European colleagues, this could be an important difference, because they're coming from a situation where most of the production is connected to the transmission grid, but we've already dealt with a situation where it's highly distributed already, and that is why we've been able to use this production and flexibility in our production to invest less in grid than what's the case in other European countries. So it's a very high utilized grid already on the higher voltage level due to this using this market and this flexibility. And we already have a lot of congestions due to this, because when we've been planning our systems, we've known that we have this flexibility connected in different parts of the system, and we've been able to use this to run our system with automatic solutions, and knowing that we will be able to access flexibility if we need it. These slides will be distributed afterwards, so I thought that was one of the reasons they're kind of heavy and sometimes, but just what is this current market? Because in order for someone to respond to our need, we need to describe what's the service, what's the flexibility need. So we have products that are described. And the current product in the regulating power market is described here. We have a minimum bid size of 10 megawatts and 10 megawatts in the eastern part, and we have a 15-minute response time and a 1-hour period. So every hour you have an activation. And then we have the pricing is a marginal price if it's use of frequency, and if we need to use a bid to solve a congestion, a grid constraint, they will pay as bid. So that's the way we're pricing it. So this is how we're doing it today, and what is happening now is this is currently a Nordic market. This is currently a Nordic market. But where we have a national control center, most of the activations today are done automatically. We have, no, not automatically, but electronically, still using the phones on some of the activations. And it's the operators that are performing the optimization to ensure that we're using the right resources. But this is now changing, because we are gonna connect this Nordic platform with a European platform. So today we already have European platform for day ahead and intraday, and the next step is to have a European balancing market for this flexibility through a European platform called MARE. And we will have 15-minute settlement period instead of 1 hour today, and we will also go down to 1 megawatt bids. So we will have more and smaller bids to be handled, and there will be no time for manual processes. So that's the change. So just repeating that we have flexibility mechanism for some of the challenges we have, but everything is changes and it's changing and it's becoming more and more difficult. So what do we need? I started saying we need more flexibility. So we try today to include new participants in our markets. We have a lot of pilots. I was not asked to talk about that today, but I'll have some link on my presentation because we see, for example, the change of charging as a provider, potential provider of flexibility services. And what we see when we try to include new participants is that we need to talk in a new way. we're used to dealing with hydro, and all our vocabulary and our products, they're typically tailor-made for the situation where we come from. And if these new participants are gonna find business opportunity, because they need to find a business opportunity, they need to find out where they can provide value, we need to be better at describing our needs. We need to be better at translating our needs to something that's understandable for more general more general approach. So some would say, what are the barriers for market entry? The market is open for those who can deliver what we need, but it might not feel that open because it's not accessible due to the fact that we're developing. And when we're now entering into a world of 1 megawatt bid size, we are at the same time working on our terms and reference for participation. And then we're back at the consumers, because they're the key. They're the key. That's the future source of flexibility that is not yet utilized. For the consumer, they could even move their demand, or they could reduce their demand. And when they do so, when they move or reduce their demand, it has many purposes. I talked about the energy markets. I haven't mentioned the tariffs, but Ignacio mentioned that earlier today, that the Norwegian tariff system is developing, and the smart consumption might be important for the tariffs for the consumers in the future. We might have new local flexibility markets, and we have the balancing markets. And all this needs to fit together and be to the best of the consumers. Because the changes in the system, there's only one energy system. It's the same energy system. And what we need, there are some physical characteristics that we as system operators need to control. And I've already talked about the balancing. We have the voltage control, congestion management. We also have stability and inertia. And both TSOs and DSOs have responsibilities in making sure that the system works. And we see that we could use different kinds of assets to perform these tasks in the future. And these new assets, they are mainly connected to the distribution grid, as we heard from BKK earlier. It's storage, demand response, and renewable energy sources. And we need to work together on how to use them and how to make aggregation of assets as a new service into these mechanisms. There's a lot of discussion in Europe going on how to do this, because even though we have a common day-ahead market, we have a common intraday market, when it comes to solving congestions, when it comes to supply contracts, DSO organization, neutrality, Europe is very heterogeneous. So there's a lot of work going on at the European level, trying to find out how to move forward on finding a way of the DSOs and TSOs to procure and use this flexibility in the future. And these are just some slides. I'm not going to use time because I want to have time for questions, showing some discussion, because it's very difficult to propose like one solution to fit everything. But there are some steps. There are some steps in the process, for example, for congestion management, that the TSOs and DSOs need to work on, but we also need to work on how to make things accessible for the consumers, for the flexibility service provider. I told you that we also have, we know what we're doing today, but nobody really knows what the future looks like. There's a lot of opportunities that are being explored, and that's why we're working, like the method of working is working together and it's also working through pilot projects and a lot of R&D projects. For example, we have one project with nodes and Agder and Glitter in Nordflex. Some things that we're performing into the balancing markets, working with Tibber and Telios, which are market participants and aggregators. And these are just some links to what some of the things that are going on at the moment. One of the things that is really interesting to talk about is how we're this year, we're doing a pilot in the MFRR market with electronic bid ordering of small size bids, being electrical heating and changing of the electrical vehicle charging. And it's really interesting because what we think is that in order to value this flexibility, we need to make sure that the local solutions and the national solution and European solutions fit together, because it's basically the same, it's the same sources of flexibility, and we need to find a way to value them so that more providers would be interested in installing new technology and entering into market solutions and making the flexibility available for the distribution system operators as well. So that was 20 minutes. I hope there's some questions because I want to discuss this with you.
Thanks for the presentation. I got one question via mail. How will the additional flexibility, I guess, be able to maintain system reliability as the variations in supply and demand grow to levels far beyond what is seen today?
How on this system?
I guess the question is whether you think it will maintain system reliability, whether it's enough for.
Well, isn't this where we should allow for the markets to work? Because basically we need the flexibility. Of course, this is one of the things that are driving the changes and development in markets, is that we want incentives to work. Of course, we want incentives for the market participants to behave to behave in a way that they support the system. For example, this is one of the reasons why the intraday market is more and more important to be able to change the plans closer to the operating hour, and also the 15-minute time resolution will also be important to make sure that you have a better balance. But there are other reliability criteria. I didn't talk about that, but inertia, which is one of the things that will ensure that the system is stable enough if there's a major incident, for example, the cable trip or a nuclear power plant falls out. And this inertia is increasingly challenged when we change the system. And that's why we're now working with the rest of the Nordic TSOs on making a new market, which is called fast frequency reserves, which is basically like a market for insurance, where we pay producers and consumptions to be able to switch off very instantly if there's a major incident and a drop in the frequency. So my answer to this is that this is basically what we're working on all the time, developing our markets and looking for new market solutions to be able to do this.
There is another question from Juan, rather provocative. Is it possible to have an electricity market without central control, or is it mandatory to always have a DSO or TSO to do the control?
I think this is one of the most interesting discussions going on. When you talk about digitalization, digitalization could have, if you go two very different directions, you could say that digitalization allows for one algorithm to solve everything, and in the other group, you would have those saying, well, digitalization allows for blockchain, peer-to-peer, and more decentralized solutions. So I think it's very difficult to see, but I think at least for now, I think that everybody would be confident knowing their system operators on both distribution and transmission level, and making sure that things work together, because there's a lot of physics in here also.
There was a follow-up question to the first one. So if I have understood correctly, you have extra production and store it to answer one aspect of flexibility. Is that right? So that's what I like. Storage is a solution in a way, or
well,
what do you think about that?
I think what's important, the reason why we can have this market, because it's pretty advanced to have this congestion and balancing done the last hour, and what the reason we can do that is because hydro can withhold their production, but basically it's the market participants that are doing this consideration if they want to withhold flexibility to make it available to the balancing market or not. We do have, when it comes to balancing, we have both the capacity and activation market, because the activation is what we do in real time. But for example, in the winter, we want to make sure that we have enough resources on our list. We want to make sure that the amount of flexibility is there when we are in the operating hour. So we then have an option market that we run during the difficult periods, where we actually pay producers and consumptions to promise that they will be available with bids. So we don't pay for their using the flexibility, but we pay them for knowing that they're going to have bids in the activation market. I don't know if that was answer to the question.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. No. Maybe I could try with a question for myself. I mean, the market has been organized in a certain way. It has been split between TSO and DSOs. The DSOs have control over regional transmission and local distribution, and you're responsible for the central grid and the system. Do you see, when you see all this flexibility needs, do you see a need to sort of rethink this organization, or?
I think that's difficult. It's as going back to that. I think all European countries have found a way of organizing that suits the national specificities. And for Norway, there's two things then which have been vital for how we're organizing it currently. And that one thing is there's a lot of there's a lot of DSOs. There are a lot of DSOs, and their grid is not, and in some areas the grid is very much interlinked. So there's a lot of system operators. And the other one is that the distribution flexibility, as I was saying, since already 40% of the flexibility is connected to the regional and the distribution grid, we've had to have a solution for a system operation that's included the medium voltage level. So this is really difficult. As we were saying earlier, you have the digitalization as well, which is a really important element in here, because a lot of things are possible, but what is then efficient? I think that's something at least the regulator is very much keen on, because making changes because it's possible might not be the right option for the consumers in the end, because they're most interested in having a low bill that represents what they're actually causing the system.
when you talk about like the number of DSOs, for example, as an economist and as sort of an expert on regulation and benchmarking, I would prefer to have many to be able to sort of have competition, because there is a kind of competition, but what you say is that maybe we should have fewer so that we could have better coordination. So is there a trade-off here, maybe?
I don't know if fewer would be better. I'm just saying that due to the fact that we have a lot, we've given the task of coordinating on the medium voltage level to the system responsible in the system.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more of a what's the cause and what's the effect, yeah.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. Anyone? If not, then I think we close. Say thank you to Anna-Sofie for a very interesting presentation, and then we take a break until 14:15. Then we start the pilots and best practice session. So go and have a coffee and welcome back in half an hour. Seminar about flexibility in local electricity grids. Here you see the program for the second half of the seminar, and now we're going to learn about some pilots and some experiences from those. So first, there is a presentation about Tibber, very specific about what Tibber is about and some models for that. Jørgen is going to talk about local flexibility markets and integrations with tariffs and other instruments. And then Hanne Sele from Sintef Seneldi is going to talk about experiences from some pilot projects. So Mario, and sorry for not, there were some questions in the Q&A field that we didn't see, but the panelists will, or Anna-Sofie Risnes will answer them afterwards. So you may use the question and answer option or the chat. I will look at both. Mario,
yes.
Can you share the presentation?
I'll try to share my presentation. Let's see whether this works. All right. Do you see?
Yep.
So you start anyway.
Yeah. So this is a joint project with Tibber and about how you can use flexibility from electric vehicles for different purposes. So this slide is about the project and also about Tibber's business model. So it's a joint project between Tibber, BKK, and NHH. So the business model of Tibber is this. I guess you can summarize it by this: the picture of this app where you can buy electricity and you can hook your electric vehicle and some of your appliances to the app, and Tibber can control them. So the customers offer the flexibility, and then Tibber will control the flexibility. And the value of the flexibility comes in from different sources. The main source is that Tibber does price optimization based on day-ahead prices. So that is the thing that is working right now. So they offer the customers a lower electricity bill by optimizing the consumption, for example, the charging of the cars. There has been some tests of offering flexibility to the TSO. And also this project has sort of discussed whether flexibility could also be used by the DSO, but these are sort of things that are on the to-do list. Next slide. So these are some publications that are related to the project. There are 2 master theses to the left. Not much to say about them. The second master thesis is actually very much related to what we're doing now. So we're now working on an article based on the results from the projects. The project is closed. The third publication here is an article actually about some challenges that occur when you try to utilize flexibility in the local grid, and has to do with the regulation of the network company, as was mentioned before, and that creates a challenge because it sort of makes it very profitable for the grid companies to acquire the flexibility from its own customers, and that's in a way is a discrimination against an aggregator like Tibber. So it makes it less profitable for the DSO to buy the flexibility from the aggregator. And the fourth paper is the one that we're writing and is based on this presentation. So Mario.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just to start with, so what we have done in this fourth, it's a working paper that Ender was showing in the previous slide, is an empirical work. However, it's not the typical empirical work where you are trying to estimate a variable as a function of other variables. The framework we are using is from mathematical programming. And basically what we are trying to do is to kind of replicate this price optimization modeling that Tibber is doing. And then we are feeding this model with the data, and where we are using some specialized software on mathematical programming to solve this model. And we are running, let's say, different type of scenarios and analyzing the results. And we don't need to go in details in the model today, but basically what we're trying to do is to define a schedule for charging the electrical vehicles of a pool of customers who are potentially using this app from Tibber. And the idea of Tibber is trying to define this schedule of charging the EVs at the prices where the energy will be cheaper for the owners of the cars. And yeah, there are some requirements in the sense that when a customer allows Tibber to define the schedule, the customer can say how much of load should be the final status of the car, and at what time that should be done. So basically, a customer might say, okay, I'm arriving home today at 5 p.m. Charge my car up to 100% of load, and I need it tomorrow by 7 in the morning. Okay, and then what Tibber will try to do is to create a schedule to charge this EV in the cheapest possible way. Okay, that's more or less say the story about what could be the technicalities in a mathematical programming model. And when I say that what we have done is an empirical work, so we have data on 438 electrical vehicles, and we have analyzed like the behavior of plugging and unplugging to charge these EVs over a period of about 5 months. And a nice thing of this data set is that some of the customers in the database, or some of the events that are registered in the database, are such that the customer has enabled this smart charging service provided by Tibber, while some other registers in the database, the customer have not chosen to use this smart charging. Okay, so basically the customer is deciding on itself at what time this vehicle will be charged, which is a nice kind of experiment for us, because then we can contrast how the non-smart charging behavior are performing according to different metrics. And now just trying to summarize the results, because as I say, we ran many different scenarios and there are, let's say, a lot of analysis to do here, but to kind of summarize what are the main findings in this work that we have done with Tibber. So first of all, these curves that you see here are part of the results that we obtain when we only use the data of customers using this smart charging ability of the app. And yeah, we have two curves here. One is for what we call the ideal solution. The ideal solution is the one prescribed by the optimization model that I showed in the previous slide. And we call it ideal because we need to make some assumptions when we are implementing that model. And then we have what is the realized solution, which is basically the schedule of charging decided by the app for these customers who use this smart charging data. And as you see, the realizations in this case, so smart charging is getting very, very close to what the ideal solution of this optimization model is saying. And as you see here, and that's perhaps not surprising when we say that the app is trying to find where are the cheapest price for the customers to charge their EVs, you will see that well, the highest peak here it occurs at night, while the schedules of charging during the day are a bit lower in terms of energy consumption. And we might wonder why the realized solution is not exactly as our optimization model, because, well, as we were saying, actually, TVER is trying to optimize this scheduling, but there are some assumptions there, as I say, which have to do, for example, with the max charging power per time period, that the model is assuming it as deterministic. But of course, in practice, there might be some, say, deviations of what is this ideal maximum charging power of the vehicle. There is also some issue in which time horizon to consider. And our model is more flexible in the sense that there could be an interval of time periods where the charging is on, then we can switch it off, and then we can switch it on again. While in practice, when a vehicle starts to charge, it is doing everything in a consecutive, in an interval of consecutive time periods without switching off, on, and multiple times. Okay, but nevertheless, these curves are very close to each other. I will get back to some numbers afterwards. But as I said, something interesting is to contrast our results for this smart charging data set with those customers who were not using the smart charging option of the app. Okay, and at first, just a visual inspection on the data of these, call them non-smart customers. As you can see here, that whenever a customer decides to act on its own without this smart charging option, what we tend to observe in the data is that basically the customer will start charging the vehicle as soon as he or she plugs it into the grid. As you see here, so that's the most typical behavior. This is the number in the horizontal axis. Here we see the number of hours that happened since the plug-in time until the vehicle was started to charge. So normally we see that immediately after plugging, this vehicle is charged. Okay, so we might think of this strategy that we call all earliest strategy, in the sense that whenever vehicle is plugged, we will assume that the customer who is acting through this non-smart policy is starting to charge immediately. And now, what will happen with this strategy when everybody starts to charge as soon as they basically arrive home and plug this vehicle? As you see here, the curve resulting of that is this gray curve. And in contrast to the curves that we had seen before, we see that the peak of consumption is more towards the evening and night, while from midnight to, say, 7 a.m., the energy consumption will be much less than what it was prescribed to be the most convenient solution according to the optimization model and according to the smart charge app. Okay. And yeah, we might already start to think that this is perhaps not so desirable from terms of congestions for the grid. And now, if we look at the non-smart charging data and we contrast this all earliest policy with what we see as realized, as we were commenting before, these curves are very close to each other. So assuming that every customer start to charge as soon as he or she plug to the system, is perhaps a very close strategy to what actually happen in reality when customers are not acting by this coordinating app of smart charge. And now, what will happen if we will run the optimization model in this non-smart charging data? Well, the results are similar to what we had seen before. As you see, this blue curve is tending to prescribe that the most economic charging will occur at late night times. And here we could see that the realizations in this non-smart charging data differs quite a lot from what should be the optimal consumption. And as I say, I was going to give some numbers other than the visual curves that I have shown. So when we look at the smart charging data and we look at the solution that was realized in practice, we see that the gap with respect to this ideal optimization model is relatively low. It's about 3%, and this is in terms of costs. While in contrast, when we look at the non-smart behavior and this all earliest solution, we see that the solution is about 10% more costly than what the ideal will be. And here we see the potential. If we will think of people who are acting on their own, we could see the potential of how it will be if we will try to coordinate their energy consumption needs when it comes to charge electrical vehicles. And there is a clear reduction of costs which could be achieved if the people will be using this smart ability. Okay. Of course, prices are relatively low for everyone. So people, if we will assume people like rationing, as economists would like to say, maybe we'll tend to observe something different. But as I said, this is an empirical study, and the reality is telling us that even though that's perhaps known by everyone, the people are not necessarily acting according to that rational behavior. And yeah, it's also interesting perhaps to wonder what is the worst case scenario, like if everybody say will act by maximizing their costs instead of minimizing. And this is a 17.8%, far from the ideal solution, which is simply saying how much things could turn even worse if we will let everybody to go for the most expensive solution. Yeah, we have also run, as I said, many other scenarios. We have run some simulations with this data. In this plot, for example, we are trying to analyze how the cost of charging varies according to different shares of, call them rational and irrational people. And we observe basically that the cost is increasing by about 1% per every share of 10% acting according to this irrational behavior or earliest strategy. And yeah, so far I talk about cost mainly, and although for all of us is perhaps intuitive to think that the shifting the consumption to the late night hours, it will definitely help to remove some congestion from the grid, especially thinking towards future, where the penetration of EVs will be even larger than what we observe today. So this is a picture of a classical, typical load profile. And this data is provided by the DSO to us. So from Vicoco, and it is taken from 3 power stations here in Bergen. And this is the typical load we will see, right? When at night people are sleeping and there are not so many processes running out there in the factories. Well, then when population start to get active in the morning, then this energy consumption start to increase until at some point evening and night this start to decrease again. Okay, so this is the typical profile that we will see when it comes to energy consumption of the population. And question is, what will happen if then we will add this charging of electrical vehicles into this curve? This is just an exercise to illustrate how the peak shaving will look like when we have the different behaviors of the people in charging the EVs. So here you see the total consumption if we aggregate the EVs, and the blue line is the one according to our optimal idealistic solution. The orange one is the one that we observe as realized in this data. It's performing a little bit worse than the optimization model. And then you see this gray one, which will assume that everybody is acting according to this irrational behavior. And as we could see here, the blue line is the one that is most effectively and in a better way is achieving this peak shaving. And in contrast, if you look at the most irrational behavior, this gray line, there is still a very, say, high variability between the consumption at late night and yeah, when the consumption is at the peak here. Okay, so this really shows that a coordinated solution for charging the EVs is helping to this desired peak shaving to remove some congestion from the grid. And yeah, we could also compute some other metrics, like for example the load factor and the power loss. This load factor is simply the average load divided by the maximum load given a certain time period. And this power loss is modeled as a quadratic function of the current. And yeah, we could also observe that this ideal solution and the earliest solution performs well and bad respectively when it comes to these metrics as well. And here, meaning load factor, we would like to see like a nice capacity utilization, and which will translate, say, in 100% here when we compute this average divided by the maximum. And as you see here, the ideal in the smart charging data is 88% versus the all earliest is 84%. If you look at all data, the ideal solution will mean a load factor of 90.2%, while the very rational behavior is 82%. The realized is something in between. And in power losses, we are also able to compute that by the coordinated solution, what is the ideal solution, the power losses are less than in the case of the irrational behaviors, okay? We need to take these numbers with caution because, as I say, this is an exercise to illustrate what will be the effect of these EVs if we will incorporate them into this data of the 3 power stations that we got from Vico. So it doesn't mean that exactly the location of these EVs will be where these power stations are located, but nevertheless, this is perhaps good enough to illustrate what could be the effect of a more coordinated energy consumption of EV owners when charging the vehicles. And now I pass back to Andre, who will talk on these concluding remarks.
Thank you, Mario, for a good presentation. Good cooperation. I mean, I guess to summarize, we obviously see that customers can save money by being smart. Maybe it's an insult to call them non-smart. I think they could have rational reasons to be what we call non-smart.
So that's why we are calling actually the non-smart data rather than the non-smart customer.
Yeah, I think that's a good good distinction. So what we saw was that that by being smart, you get less cost for the customers, and you also have some savings for the grid operator, a higher load factor and lower losses. Yeah, I think we just close there and open for questions. I have one from Juan. It would be nice to know what changes Tibber made based on these findings. That's a good question. I don't think they have made any changes based on these findings, but I think a challenge here is that some customers choose to be what we call non-smart and to sort of sabotage the optimization, and I guess that problem will be even bigger if you try to sell the flexibility or try to control the flexibility for other purposes than saving money for the customers. So no, I don't think they did some changes, but maybe they will. I think maybe Jürgen had a question, I suspect. You would like to ask it yourself?
Yes, it's probably related to what you said before Mario started his excellent presentation, and about the incentives of a network operator to either sort of try to capture this flexibility in themselves or purchase a service from a service provider like Tibber or similar. What are the differences?
I think that's a very interesting question. I think what we have to remember here is that BKK, the DSO is regulated on its income. So its income is actually determined by the regulator. They actually have an incentive to buy the flexibility from their own customers, because that's just the redistribution of income or tariffs between their own customers. If they buy it from as an external actor like Tibber, then you might risk that their profit will actually go down because their income will stay constant, and it will affect their costs. So there is a risk that they will not, if they cannot get the cost reduction that is the same as what they pay, then that they will actually be punished for doing that. But if they do it by buying it from their own customers, then they're sure to actually save money. Yeah. So that's a challenge, I think.
I'll come back to that in my presentation then.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's see if there is a question in the. So we have several sources of question here. So I see in the Q&A session that Sheriff has a question. Is price optimization based only on the spot market part of the price, or including also the grid price component? Assuming it is only based on the spot market part, can there be a conflict between grid interest and the customer's economic interest? Yeah, so I guess I should answer this. The price optimization is purely based on the energy price in the spot market. So there's in the grid tariffs are not included here. But whether there could be a conflict, Jörgen, can you help me? I cannot think of a conflict, but I'm a bit slow.
Sorry, I had to read an email.
No. So I have to think about that. I doesn't.
Yeah, there can be.
Yeah. Okay, Jörgen.
There can definitely be a conflict, because it's not necessarily so that the issue at hand in the network, where there is some sort of, let's say, a congestion in the local network, comes at the same time as there is a high price in the day-ahead market. So the incentives from the sort of the power market or the energy market and the network are not necessarily coordinated in time, because these are simply different markets.
What we see in the results is that optimizing on the spot market also reduces or increases the load factor. So in a way, for these cases that we have seen here, that it seems to be consistent in a way. But I agree that there could at least be some, at some times there could be conflicting objectives here.
We have that in other parts of the network where you have a lot of production, for instance, and where the production doesn't necessarily coincide with, or the local production doesn't necessarily coincide with sort of the global production. Then you have different. The prices are essentially set by what we could call the global production, whereas the local production could have a very different time pattern depending on the source of production.
I have another question here from Olvar. An interesting question. Is this changing the charging profile after the prices in the day-ahead market are available, or are they actively bidding into the market? I'm not sure what they are actually doing. But I'm not sure if it's. I mean, they optimize based on the price profile that is, or the cleared prices in the day ahead market. So given that they don't have market power, then it shouldn't really matter. I don't know. Meta says that they are using the prices ex post, so they are actually optimizing on the prices that were cleared. Well, yeah. Any more questions? I think we used our time. So then, Jørgen, I give the floor to you. Tariffs and other instruments.
See if I can find my presentation once more. There are too many windows. There it is on my computer. You probably don't have it in the right mode yet.
There it is.
Thank you. So thank you for having me, and thank you for this opportunity. Yeah, Endre has already said my name, so I won't repeat it. As you may know, I work with DNVGL. It's actually the world's largest independent advisor on renewable energy. So I have, in the energy division, I have 2,000 colleagues. Mostly they are working with technical issues, but there are some hundreds of us working with more economic issues around the globe. So talking about flexibility markets and local markets, I thought it may be useful to start with sort of discussing what we normally discuss in markets. There's probably some demand and probably some supply. So we should look at those separately. Being educated at NHH, I think it's useful to start with the demand for resources. So it's always, let's look at the demand side. What are the needs? So if we look at needs for flexibility, there are typical some needs that are very location specific. They are related to dealing with issues in the local network. That could be voltage, that could be short circuit capacity, that could be normal thermal capacity, that could be to alleviate for some congestion if there is some maintenance or if there is a failure. With local specific needs, you need to solve the problem locally. So it doesn't really matter if you have an issue in Bergen and you have a flexible resource in Asker where I'm sitting, that doesn't really help much. So the location specific needs, they are really location specific and they are in a sense unique. Or sort of there are similar problems on a number of locations, but as the location differs, there are different needs. There are also some global needs. Anne-Sophie talked about some of those. So that could be, for instance, when the TSO or the TSOs in plural work with frequency management. Well, the frequency is not really global in its actual sense, because the frequency in the Nordic region is not the same as the frequency on the continental Europe, or it's the same, but it's not necessarily synchronous. It's 50 hertz. So, but when the TSOs would like to solve the frequency in some sense, it doesn't really matter whether the resources are in Bergen or in Asker or in Helsinki, because they are all on the same synchronous system. Of course, if there is a large deviation and you need to activate a lot of resources, you could of course run into some congestion issues in the network if you activate too much in one specific location, but the need is not really particularly local. It's more global. Also, some other features to be aware of when it comes to the demand, because the technical requirements from what the customers or the buyers of the flexibility, what they require, that varies. So Anna-Sofie showed you a few, at least one illustration for the MFRR market, which is one type of resource, which has some specific requirements. There are other products that the TSOs typically purchase that have different requirements in terms of response time or ramp rates, requirements for duration, or how long you can sort of sustain a delivery, for instance. So those needs are different for the different, or those requirements are different for the different needs. Location-specific needs, they are typically less time critical than the global needs, because for the location-specific needs, it's not about frequency. And if the issue at hand is not about frequency, whether you have a solution in this second or 5 seconds later is not necessarily a big deal. If you have a thermal constraint or if you have a voltage issue, it doesn't matter too much if you don't manage to solve the problem immediately or just after 1 minute or half an hour. That varies, of course. Depends on what are the issue at hand that the flexibility eventually would solve. So luckily there is of course also a supply side out there. And then for all resources, we have to bear in mind that they have a location. So the value of a resource depends not only on the needs, it also depends on the location. Because again, it doesn't matter if I have a resource here in Asker and there is a problem in Bergen, I can't really solve that. So the location is quite important. The cost structure for resources is also quite different. Some of them, they have very high CapEx costs. They have very low OpEx costs. They, for instance, require quite a significant sort of remuneration to be idle, to be sort of like a capacity payment, whereas the cost of activation could be next to nothing. Others, they have a quite different cost structure. Some batteries, for instance, they will probably be there anyway. Typically the batteries on wheels, they are going to be connected to the network anyhow. So the CapEx of connecting the battery is next to nothing. The OpEx might be significant, depends on the requirements of the battery owner, of course, when the owner intends to use his battery for other purposes, for instance, for driving. Also, some of these costs, they are really out of the pocket expenses somehow. Other costs, they are not really, or they have a different nature. They could be opportunity costs, for instance. In some markets, like in Germany, there is a very significant focus on or opposition from the regulator about market-based flexibility. They have a cost-based remuneration structure. Now, what is the cost of a flexible demand? That's in many instances very hard to determine. So the result in Germany is that the demand side so far doesn't struggle to participate because they can't be remunerated properly. An important thing to bear in mind for the supply side is that the demand they face is, it varies quite a lot. On my specific location, there could be a very rare demand from the network company. I could see some opportunities perhaps in the energy market, in the wholesale market, by smart charging of my car, for instance. But on the substation outdoor here, potentially there could be a congestion, an issue there in February, otherwise probably not. So I can't really make a business case for my flexibility of selling just to the closest substation. So I would typically look for opportunities to sell multiple services to make my business case solid for my flexible resource. In these markets, or when flexibility demands meet flexibility supply, we see different forms of transactions. And here we come back to the point from the previous presentation about tariffs and rebates. So some network companies in Norway, they offer a rebate for customers if they have are willing to accept curtailment in their consumption. It's unprioritized demand. That has the effect, and a similar effect as from time varying tariffs, that has the effect that the cost for the network company of using that flexibility is zero. The costs, the rebate, for instance, will be covered by the other network customers. And that is probably the problem that Endre was describing. If, on the other hand, the DSO would pay his customers to deviate from his initial planned consumption, for instance, then we would not have that sort of incentive problem. This is one of the reasons why some regulators, they are quite skeptical towards such rebate schemes. And also a problem, or one of the disadvantages by using time variant grid charges, at least when the time variation is predetermined and quite stiff. Come back to that. Other forms of transactions are when there are dedicated markets. So we see the TSOs, for instance, they maintain different product markets. They have product markets for different frequency services. And as Anne-Sophie mentioned, they also have a product market where they combine two needs, frequency management and congestion management, in the same product. So they simply use the product in different manners, but it's the same market platform to purchase this thing. Then there are also some integrating platforms. They actually try to integrate all the opportunities for the sellers and for the buyers. And sort of the best known example to me of that is something I've been participating in developing. So that's nodes. So I'll briefly explain to you how nodes works. Here is the demand side. It could be the TSO as explained. It could be the DSOs. Also here says BRP, it's Balanced Responsible Party. We can think of that as the wholesale market essentially. On the supply side, we have different kind of actors. Behind these actors, there are ultimately some prosumers or small producers or plain consumers somehow. So the product markets, that's typically used by the TSOs, and they purchase reserves and activate reserves from these providers. The wholesale markets, that the transactions there, we typically see them in the day and an intraday market, of course. Wholesale transactions have to close before the intraday or when the intraday market closes. So the integrating market platform sits or has positioned itself in the middle. So it typically purchases flexibility from aggregators or aggregators sell their flexibility on this marketplace, similar to the other marketplaces, and the DSOs or the TSO, whoever, could purchase. The interesting feature is these two lateral arrows. So if you are a provider, flexibility provider, you can offer your flexibility to the marketplace, and then the marketplace will figure out where can we maximize the value of your flexibility. Would that be here locally, or should we simply feed your offer forward to the day-ahead market or the intraday market, or maybe we should forward this to the TSO in the reserve market? And that's how an integrating flexibility platform could work. Then you can sort of think of a setup where you have, or to start differently, in the day-ahead market, we have a couple of what we call NEMOs. They are they collect the bids and asks from the market, from the BRPs, from the producers and the buyers. But there is only one price calculation in Europe. So it is one integrated day-ahead market, and it's also one integrated intraday market in Europe. Conceptually, whether there is one integrated flexibility market or not, well, we are not there yet. That is one integrated. It could be multiple power exchanges as a gatekeeper to one integrated market, or there could be separate integrated markets. That development we don't know yet how that will look like, but there are a couple of opportunities there. The regulators have so far, or the Commission have so far, not done too much in sort of writing rules about this piece. They have quite a lot of rules about the day-ahead, intraday, and the reserve timeframes. Not that much about the flexibility opportunities. It's a bit unknown to them yet, I think. So the key challenges here is first of all to avoid locking flexibility inside some single purposes. So one of the disadvantages with tariffs, they tend to ensure that it's complicated for the owner to use the flexibility for anything else than the tariff sort of stimulates. It's not necessarily so, but it could typically be the case that you lock in flexibility. For instance, this rebate, utkobbar tariff, can have the feature that it's impossible for the customer on such a tariff to offer services in other flexibility or to other buyers than his counterpart in the tariff scheme. So that should be avoided. It is a challenge to facilitate value stacking, but it's important in particular for the DSOs, but generally for all buyers of flexibility, to recognize that if you would like to have something that might look like a little bit like a liquid market for flexibility, you have to be prepared to pay for what you would like to have. And then you will also have to accept that your suppliers, your sellers of flexibility, they need solid business cases. So we need to define our demand so that the sellers can figure out how to combine different revenue streams and create useful business cases for their participation in the flexibility market. And that's the sort of the latter point. Buyers need to understand they have to remunerate the participants decently. Otherwise, there won't be sufficient flexibility. So for some of the suppliers, long-term contracts might be needed in order to make, to trigger this necessary investments. Also, long-term contracts might be needed for a network operator or a network planner to rely on the flexibility. at least until they have sufficient experience with sort of normal, flexible behavior. And for network or network planners, it's if they cannot rely on the flexibility, it's very hard for them to take into account the flexibility when designing the network. And if they can't do that, we lose quite a lot of the potential value of flexibility. So a lot of the value of flexibility is that we potentially can reduce the network investments. And if we cannot do that, then we lose the value, so to speak, or we fail to realize it. So that's it. Questions?
Yeah, I don't see. I could have a question for myself. You mentioned locking. So that is when these measures like utkoblet forbruk, they sort of dominate so much that no flexibility is offered to other sources. If I understood you correctly.
Yeah, so you can think of this if you offer a rebate for some type of customers, where the requirement is that the network company should be able to disconnect you or either whole load or part of your load or supply for that reason for at, let's say, 1 hour's notice. If that's the only requirement, then it's pretty hard for the same resource to participate in offering services, for instance, to the TSO in terms of frequency response, for instance. However, if it's evident that the network company will mostly need this service on Wednesdays or in the afternoon or in February or in some sort of predetermined time. So if you make sure to specify, well, it's this time window I'm interested in, that's what I'm giving you a rebate for you to be available in this time window. Outside that time window, you can do whatever you like. That's a different thing.
But wouldn't the customers, I mean, if they feel that the rebate that the network company is offering them is not enough to sort of compensate for the loss of value they could have from selling the flexibility in other markets, then they will not accept. So is it really a problem now?
Well, so far part of the problem is that these rebates, of course, they are free for the network companies. They are paid by the other grid customers directly. They are not. This mechanism is not internalized in the net revenue calculation.
So it's the same problem that I was talking about before.
Exactly. And then when we see a rebate of 90–95%, that is of course sufficient for some. So if you indeed have that flexibility, you would be stupid not to accept the terms. Now, if the value of that flexibility is actually much lower than a 95% rebate, let's say it's a 17% rebate, and that's because I don't need the flexibility for the whole year. I need it, let's say, 3 months. Well, I could give you a 17% rebate, but then you should be free to do whatever you like in the other months. Now, the network companies with the current setup, they don't have the incentives to do that. Well, somehow this should be fixed by regulation, but somehow this should also be fixed by the network operators, that they are careful and sort of that they are careful what they ask for.
So what could the regulator do to, I guess the companies will act in their own interest in a way, but...
The regulator can, for instance, say that there should be no rebates on the tariff. If you would like your grid customers to behave differently, you have to pay them directly.
So you forbid them?
Simply.
Okay, that's an easy answer.
You would have to forbid the type of tariff, but you don't have to forbid the activity. So it's just a remuneration sort of mechanism that must be regulated. Eventually, it should be regulated. Fix that. It's fairly easy to fix if you'd like to do it. So far, it hasn't been a very big problem either, but this is sort of one of the potential problems.
I don't see any other questions. No, I'm trying to monitor both the Q&A and the chat, but I don't see any.
Don't see any either.
Well, here's one. Is there only one marketplace for flexibility in Norway? Nodes, question mark?
Yeah, well, Nodes is actually an operator of marketplaces.
Places.
Yes.
Okay.
In plural. So there is one provider of such marketplaces in Norway. There is one based in Germany with Apex. There is one in UK. But Nodes is also operating in UK, so there you have competing platforms. So far, in the day-ahead market, we have competing power exchanges, but there we have an integrated price calculation. There is no need to have an integrated price calculation in flexibility, because anyway, the price formation in the flexibility market here in Oslo or in Asker would be different from the price formation in the local flexibility market in Bergen. And even Bergen is too big of a location because there are dozens of potential sub-markets, sort of local sub-markets. There is really local. I mean, the word local is pretty important when you talk about flexibility.
But how much activity is there in this in Nodes?
In all these flexibility markets, they are essentially pilots. We have to recall that the potentially important buyers here, that's the DSOs in Europe, in Norway and otherwise. For approximately 100 years, they have developed their networks under one simple planning rule. You have to have sufficient capacity because in the local network, because once you have built your network, built your lines, once you have sort of developed a region for electricity, it's pretty costly to change the capacity of the network. However, when you make your investment, the marginal cost of additional capacity is next to nothing. So the design criteria has been for 100 years, design for what you think is possible in 70 years or in 60 years, and then build a little more than that. Because the marginal cost of investing too much or in very high capacity is next to nothing, or has been next to nothing. What is new, and that is really new, is the ability to control demand in such a way that it could be an alternative to expand the network continuously. But this starts now. And the starting point is that most of the network, for instance, in Norway, has extremely good capacity in comparison with demand. There are substations here and there are lines here and there with insufficient capacity. Most of those, they are quite old. So they have to be replaced anyway. Sooner or later, maybe they will be replaced in 10 years' time. When they will be replaced, they will not be replaced with an equally small, because at the time of reinvestment, the marginal cost of capacity is again next to nothing. It's not literally next to nothing, but it's very small. So we come from a starting point where flexibility is not a very big deal, but we expect it will be very important when the electrification really kicks off. So the DSOs are in the preparatory mode. Some of them have some problems. A lot of them have no problems. So this is nothing that we have to fix today or this week. But it's useful for the DSOs to spend some resources now to figure out how to plan their network for lower investments and higher degree of utilization of flexibility at the demand side. So that's a long process. And it will take probably a decade before we have really significant changes in investment behavior.
Okay, thanks for a good presentation. And then let's move to the last speaker today, Hanne Sele from Sineldi and Sintef Energy. We'll talk about activation of flexibility at the customer side, experiences from pilot projects. So Hanne, can you share your screen? You have to unmute yourself, Hanne. I don't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Try to find. So now it's presenter mode. I hope.
Yes, we can see it.
I tried to turn on my camera, but it didn't work at the moment. So
I don't see you, but I see your presentation. So
but that's the most important. That's
yeah.
Now you can see me.
Yeah.
I'm at home office. I have to share the video with the PlayStation, so I hope it works. I will give you a presentation about pilot project. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. My name is Hanne Sele. I'm a researcher at Sintef Energy in Trondheim. And I'm also related to Sineldi. I'm a part of the center management as administrative coordinator. And I'm also responsible for the work package that is focusing on interaction DSO TSO, where the main focus is how can we use flexibility for the benefit of the power system. I have split my presentation into 3 parts. First, given a presentation of Sineldi, what it is. We have flexibility as a common priority area this year and next year. And I will tell you a little bit about why and why we are doing that. And also presenting some pilot projects on local flexibility. Both some previous ones and that we have performed in research projects at Sintef, but also some ongoing pilot projects and planned projects in Sineldi. So first, Sineldi is one of the centers for environment-friendly energy research in Norway. And this scheme, this FME scheme, is the most prominent tool for long-term energy research that we have in Norway. And the research is performed in close, is performed in close cooperation with the industry. We started in 2016, and then 8 different FMEs was started. And we are the only one focusing on system. There are some focusing on biofuels, there are energy efficiency in industry, and you are also one on hydropower. So, and we have the system focus, and we are focusing on system innovation. So this is illustrating the focus of Sineldi. We are developing the electricity grid of the future. The dark blue is representing the distribution grid, and we are working for the future distribution grid, focusing on 2030, 2040, and we want to enable connection both of electrical vehicles, the solar panel, distributed generation such as wind power, also and batteries, electrical batteries that can be installed in the grid or behind the meter, which is at the customer. And we also, even if we are focusing on the distribution grid, we also have a link to the transmission grid. We are seeing the whole system, and we do that in based on the interaction between DSO and TSO. The main flexible or a larger share of flexible resources are connected to the distribution grid, but the TSO also needs flexibility. So we want to find out where is flexibility available and who can use it and when can it be used for what purpose. So our mission, we work towards digitalization and modernizing the electricity distribution grid, both to contribute for higher efficiency, flexibility, and resilience. And we try to balance the main goal. The future grid should be cost efficient. It should be robust also, and it should be flexible. And so we also when we're doing the research, we're also taking care of the environment, the economy, and security of supply. And by robust, that includes both security of supply, but also cybersecurity and privacy. In Syneldi, we have 6 main work packages divided into different tasks for the DSO. First, focusing on the first work package is smart grid development and assets management. How to include flexibility in planning of the future grid. The second work package is smart grid operation. What will be the future control center? How to use flexibility in grid operation. And the third is the interaction DSO-TSO, looking into the flexible resources and how to utilize those by the DSO or by the TSO or in cooperation. And as was discussed in the previous presentation, to be handled in the market or other business models. We have a work package on microgrids. Microgrids consists of flexible load, flexible storage, and distributed generation. Or it can be seen as a flexible resource for the rest of the power system. We are looking into the details of the specific flexible resources, modeling flexible loads, what can be shifted, for example, modeling storage, electrical batteries, or electrical vehicles, which is also a battery, just you can move it, and also distributed generation. And we also have looking into the customer because the social science, how we cannot realize flexibility without including the customers, and how do we do that? We have the last work package focusing on smart grid scenarios and transition strategies. We have developed mini scenarios, try to describe the future, and then also looking into strategies, how to come to the future, what are the next, what are the steps. So this is the work packages. And also the Zinelli, we have 29 partners, we are working for 8 years. We have a budget of 365 millions. That's both cash funded by industry and research council, but it's also in kind. In kind from user partners and in kind from research institutes. And the in kind from user partners will be realized through pilot projects. And that's something that I will present a bit later. This is just an overview of the typical partners, of the group of partners that we have in Zinelli. We have the research institutes, we have the university, NTNU in Trondheim. We have system operators, both DSOs and the TSO, and we have technology providers. And also, in addition to that, we have the authorities as members, market operator. We have companies working with knowledge transfer and innovation. And we have a scientific committee with international partners to collaborate with. And this is just the map, the 29 partners that we have already. One important thing with Zinelli is that the research is multidisciplinary. We have power engineering, cybernetics, and information and communication technology, but also we have social science on top of that. So most of the activities are multidisciplinary, but we also have to go into details in research also. We are doing research. Researchers are performing modeling, analyzing data, etc. They are working in laboratories. We have a smart grid laboratory at NTNU. And also what we call living labs. We have pilot projects. We are using the power system also as a laboratory. So we are not developing the best technology thing, but we are focusing on the system, how to take all the new technologies, the incentives, stakeholders, how to best way for them to work together, so we can so we are targeting system innovation. This is a broad picture, so we are working to achieve that. So flexibility is a hot topic, and the partners, they want to look into how can they include flexibility in their normal operation of the grid and everything they do. So from this year, we decided that we have flexibility as a common priority area. And that's a way of working multidisciplinary, but also to cooperate between work packages. And the reason for doing that is we want to have a holistic treatment of this topic because it affects all the research areas in Zinelli. And since this is also a way to increase the momentum coming from today knowledge about flexibility and to in fact realize how utilization of flexibility in the grid. That is to come from pilot projects and to implement it in normal operation. And we will also contribute to system innovation in the smart grid transition. And also, one important reason to do this is the expected electrification that we can see, and also the increased integration of variable renewables, all down to the end user level. It's not, previously it was mainly the large hydropower plants connected to the transmission grid, but now you have generation also behind the meter because these households have invested in solar panel on their roof. But in addition to new generation on customer level, there are also new large industrial loads that will also give new challenges for the grid operators. And that's, for example, data centers that will come. And we also think that with use of flexibility, that can be an alternative to grid investments, or at least to reduce the amount of investments that have to be done in the power system. I think there's a planning 140 billion Norwegian crowns in investments for 20 years or something, but can be reduced that amount of costs. So to contribute to this, we have to find a way how to activate, how to pay for flexible resources and include them in all the phases for the management of the grid, from planning to operation. So lot of talking about flexibility, but what is it? This is from EDSO for Smart Grid, European Distribution System Operators. They have defined flexibility as modification of generation injection and or the consumption patterns that can be done on an individual or aggregated level, and often in reaction to an external signal. There is someone that needs that production or consumption is changed. And by responding to this signal, there is the resource contribute to maintain the stable grid operation. We have developed characteristics of flexible resources, try to describe flexibility in a general term. So this is in a scientific paper that under peer review, but it will be probably it will be, hopefully it will be accepted and available. But we try to find how to describe these resources, and it can be that they are related to power capacity, the volume of response, also the ramping capacity, how fast they can respond from receiving the signals to the actual response is available. And also a parameter is related to the duration. For how long can this response be achieved before it has to be connected again, if this is a load that is disconnected. One important thing also is the rebound effect. What happens when you connect the load again? Do you increase the load or not? Because flexibility can solve a problem, but when reconnecting them again, you have to avoid that you're not generating a new problem. And perhaps there is some requirement for recovery duration before the flexible resource is available again. And there's a lot of different resources. If you look into the flexibility resources, it can be both the flexibility assets, or it can be flexibility in operation of the grid. If you look into grid operation, it can be examples such as network reconfiguration. It can be dynamic line rating in the power system. That's not common, that's not often used. But if looking into the assets, it's on the demand side, supply side, and storage. And the demands, they can be shiftable. You just turn them off and on at a later time. Supply is typically PV panels or hydro plants, wind generation. You cannot turn on the sun, so you have to mainly to disconnect the generation, curtailment of generation, perhaps if that's needed. And on storage, it can be stationary or it can be mobile storage. And you need, if you have these flexible resources, to have a flexible solution, you need some enablers. And that can be the market, flexibility market. It can be through regulation, and way of a grid tariff with an agreement, or just as an implicit response to a grid tariff. And also grid interconnection between different power systems. So this is on flexibility. So now going into pilot project on local flexibility. I picked some previous, some history back, and then some ongoing pilots. Because we did some remote load control. This is in a previous pilot project. We did remote load control of water heaters at approximately 1,000 households. We disconnected the water heaters for 1 hour, one different hour for several days, to see what was the response between 7 and 8, between 8 and 9, etc. And the largest response from disconnecting water heaters was between 8 and 9 in the morning. This is only on weekdays, no weekends. And the main response from water heaters is at the same time as the system peak hour, the Nordic system peak hour. So if you could include this flexibility potential, if you can activate this in this hour, then the peak load reduction could be reduced by 600 megawatt. That's on national level if we got 50% of households involved. So we took this experience, introduced this into another pilot project, where we performed, we introduced remote load control of water heaters and a time of day tariff. We had a time of day tariff with high price period, 2 hours in the morning and afternoon. We have remote load control of water heaters, and they also had an energy contract with the hourly spot price. And we also gave them a reminder, a L button reminder. It's just a plastic tag to put on the washing machines or whatever, just as a reminder for the customers to be aware of these periods of the day. And in this pilot, we got a response. First of all, they didn't complain about cold water. So even if you disconnect the electricity used for the water heaters for 2 hours, the thermal capacity is enough to keep the water at a sufficient temperature. We cannot have manual response on hourly basis, of course. So there is a need for a technology for load control, if it's remote load control or just load control. And we got a higher response than in the previous slide, so we could get 1,000 megawatt hours if we introduce this in Norway, because they did an extra effort due to the button. This is the last box there. So there is a potential. We asked them in a survey, this is a national survey. We asked, what do you expect to achieve? What savings do you expect to achieve if you are contributing with remote control, or if you are allowing remote control, or if you are doing manually change? So if we can say that for remote load control, they expect 200 euros per year in savings to get 55% of the customers. And a bit more for manually change. So you can say that if the customer are in response, they larger share is willing to contribute. If you also ask them on a cold winter day, what could they contribute with? So that's also to delay manually change consumption. Then with 74% answered yes. A smaller share was positive to remote control of water heaters, and 50% wanted to share electricity with others by manually reducing your own consumption. This is to share electricity with your neighbors if there were to avoid outages in the power system. So there is a potential, and the customer are willing, but the business models need to be developed. So we will try to test this in pilot project. Sinelli has 3 main groups focusing on flexibility, application of smart grid data, flexibility applied on system services, and microgrids. So we will use smart meter data for load forecasting, fault locations, and grid planning in a zero emission area. We have microgrids pilot project on Utsira, Sandbakken, that's a Hvaler area, and Skagerrak Energy Lab. That's a football stadium with a battery and a solar panel. And on flexibility applied on system services, we have 2 pilots for flexibility markets. We have one pilot for implicit response, eFlex, and 1 active home. That's them testing of a new grid tariff among households. So taking those on flexibility market, we will demonstrate how or if a market-based solution can be an alternative, and if it can be used for congestion management in the distribution grid. And 2 areas are selected, one at Utsira and one at Bremanger. Utsira is on the west part of Norway, and Bremanger is at the northwest of Norway. So Utsira is an island connected to the mainland via submarine cable. And there are already problems, some voltage problems today, and also there will be an electric ferry that has to be charged, and that can increase the problems that's already there. There are flexible resources available, and they're also developing they have an energy management system for coordinating flexible resources and optimize power flow. And they are working with developing a dashboard for monitoring available flexibility. And during this autumn, we will establish Nodes platform. We will use Nodes platform to establish a flexibility market at this island. And the other pilot project for flexibility market is Bremangerlandet. There are also grid problems today. So, there's a long distance, there's a voltage problem at the end, and there's a large industrial customers at the end. But so this customer is a part of the problem, but they're also a part of the solution because they can contribute with flexibility. So the DSO is planning a new power line in 2022, but in the meantime, will test flexibility market to see if they will look at this as a temporary solution and get experiences related to this type of market. So we are starting with flexible resources have been analyzed based on smart meter data, and the Nodes platform is established. And as I was told that last week, the first trade was already done. So then there the pilot is in operation. So just to summarize, so Sinelli working toward digitalization and modernizing electricity distribution grid. It should be high efficiency, cost efficient, flexible, and resilience. And we want to have a system where flexible resources are included. There is a potential for flexibility among residential customers and also larger customers, but business models, control technologies, etc., need to be implemented. Find out how to do it to realize, to come from pilot project to reality in that way. But pilot projects are a very good start. It gives experiences, and we will see how it works and if it can solve the grid problems. I think that was, that's my last slide. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Hanne. Thank you for your presentation. There are 2 questions here. Would it be required, I think this is for the water heater example maybe, would it be required to upgrade the end user's energy meter to activate flexibility at the customer side?
I think it should rather be technology directly connected to the water heater to perform the control. But the customer can invest in a smart house that can be connected to the smart meters via standardized interface. There's a HAN port on the smart meter, so you can connect smart house system to that and perform the channel for remote control. But I think specific control system will mainly be used.
So this could be a business opportunity for a company like Tibber, for example.
Yes.
There's another question. Could you, about the work packages in the Senaldi project, could you tell us a little more about the smart grid scenarios you are studying?
Yes, we have. We started Senaldi with meeting all the partners together, gathering, and doing the foresight, using the foresight method, discussing what will be the future related to what drivers, what incentives, what available technologies, what type of stakeholders. So in total, we have 110-20 mini scenarios that describing different parts of the future, both positive and negative. And also then we have been grouping them into 4 main scenarios and putting them in an axis that you have from going from passive customers to the active customer, and also going from today's grid, which is not smart, to the future smart grid. So then trying to describe the stories for different main scenarios. So Senaldi is working for a scenario with active customers and a digitalized grid as the future.
That sounds like a good way to, let's hope that will materialize.
You're doing research.
So that's a good way to end the seminar with that prediction for the future. And then I just say thank you to all the panelists. We will make the video and I guess all the presentations as well available via the Energy Lab website. So thank you again to all the panelists and all you who attended. Have a good day.